there, my name is Emma. I'm an artist and DIYer. Welcome to my channel. If you know me, you know I am a huge fan of Dollar Tree. I live down the street from one. I'm always there. I am addicted. I don't care if it's $1.25. It is totally worth it for me. So I thought I'd take some of my favorite things that I get from Dollar Tree and turn them into some aesthetic decor. This first DIY I actually tried last year and posted it on TikTok. It actually originally came from a trend from a few years ago where people were putting moons on mirrors, so I thought I would try it. I took some Dollar Tree mirrors and joint compound, and I ended up doing 5 phases of the moon to make an adorable little set, and here's how I did it. You're gonna start off by getting 5 of these little mirrors at Dollar Tree. They're actually gonna be in the candle section because they're meant to put candles on. As you can see, I already did this DIY once, but I only did 1 of them, so now we're gonna make a full set. I'm using joint compound and just a brush to smear the joint compound onto the mirror. You wanna make sure you're doing a nice thick layer. It's gonna be a lot easier if it's thicker for you to build up your craters. Once I have it to my desired thickness, I'm actually going to use a wet, fluffy brush. It's really important that you have water. The water is kind of like flour when you're baking. It kind of makes the joint compound not stick to your brush. So if it's sticking to your brush too much, you need to use more water. And then you're going to make some craters and smear out that texture of the brush strokes that you had before. To make a crater, you're just going to swirl your brush around in a deep spot, and then you're going to push some of that joint compound up towards the crater, the kind of circle that you made, and that's going to create a ridge around it. And I actually do really like those lines that kind of lead up to the craters. I sometimes had to add a little bit more joint compound, as you can see, but I just have craters all over, and then I made sure that I had some that were kind of going off the edge too, to make it a little bit more realistic. And then I am doing kind of a medium amount of joint compound on this sort of crescent. Again, making craters, swirling, and then pushing that joint compound out. It's really, really important that you have a ridge, and that's what's going to make it super realistic. And in between all of these steps, I'm wetting my brush a bunch. I then used my wet brush to smear off the edges. I did end up going back and making this a little bit thicker, which you'll see in a second, but this is a general idea for how to make your edges nice. You're going to use a wet brush, clean it off. You can use your finger just to go around. This is super easy to clean up. And then I used a paper towel to make sure I got off the excess. You will be able to kind of clean the mirror again once it's dry, so don't worry about that. And then I went and did my smallest one. As you can see, I already had one done from last year, and this is a year old, and it stayed super, super well. And I just created a nice crater, cleaned up my edges, and in order to make this one not shiny, because I had added powder to it, I just covered it with more joint compound. The next day, they did end up cracking a little bit, which is totally to be expected. Don't worry about it. Honestly, they look fine if you're not looking up too close, but I just went ahead and added some more joint compound in the cracks. Might crack again, you can add more. The other thing you can do is add a little bit of acrylic paint to the cracks, because that won't crack again. So that's another option, but I love the result. They look amazing. Seriously, so realistic, and they're not hard to do at all. I love how these turned out. They were super easy. The detailing looks so amazing. I think they turned out really realistic. The one I did a year ago is still awesome. Super, super hard, hasn't chipped. So I highly recommend doing this. Each mirror is about $1.25. Joint compound is pretty cheap too. I'll link some below. I only did 5 phases. I don't know if there is anything correct about the way that I did these, but you could do as many phases as there are. I am not sure of the amount, but you could do all the phases of the moon. This is such a fun DIY. This next DIY is inspired by a craft I used to do during summer camp when I used to have a painting studio. The kids absolutely loved it. We would take contact paper and then I would have them draw with yarn and stick it to the contact paper, and then we would have these awesome pictures at the end. So for this one, I thought I'd take that same kind of technique and use some yarn from Dollar Tree and a pot I got at Dollar Tree to make a funky 70s planter. And here's how I did it. First, you're gonna start off by picking out the colors for your yarn and your pot. My Dollar Tree had a bunch of different colors of yarn, and I have some at home as well. And then they had like 4 different colors for pots, so I went with this white one. and I wrapped some double-sided tape all the way around it. I should have just done 3 layers of double-sided tape, but I thought I was being really brilliant and kind of planning out the curves with my tape instead of just doing 3 whole layers, and I'll kind of have to fix that later. Then I cut a little section of my yarn and started making these wavy shapes all around. This double-sided tape is super sticky, so it is not budging. You're just going to try to get as close as possible to the next layer, so I'm really pushing my yarn in towards my first layer of yarn and making sure that there are no gaps, as much as possible at least, and then you're going to cut it off. I tried to make all of them start at the same section so I could just kind of put that side to the back. And as you can see, because I didn't put enough tape from the get-go, I kind of had to build it up in the peaks and the valleys, but you might still have to do that either way, but I think it would help if you just put 3 rows of it, but I was trying to not be wasteful and waste my tape. So this is what it looked like before I ended up cutting some of my tape. I thought it would be good to just cut the tape with an X-Acto knife, and then for the last few layers, do it in a hot glue gun. The hot glue gun is much more dangerous. You'll definitely burn your fingers, but it'll last longer. So I thought it would be nice to have kind of the edges solidified with that hot glue gun, and it did take probably 3 times the amount of time that the tape took because you kept having to reapply it, but I think it turned out really well either way. You can do whatever technique you want, but I think it turned out super cute, and I love that it has kind of a fun 70s vibe to it. You can use whatever colors you want and do whatever design you want, which is what's great about this technique. Although the double stick tape was definitely easier, hot glue will probably last a little bit longer. I have a lot of faith in this double stick tape, but I'm assuming that hot glue will last longer, so you can use whichever technique you want. If you're maybe giving this as a gift or want it to last forever, you might want to do all of it with hot glue. But if you're like me and change up your decor a lot and maybe want to take it off eventually and redo this planter, I like to do stuff that can be kind of disassembled. So I'm gonna stick with my double-sided tape, but it's totally up to you. Again, whatever design you want, the world is your oyster with this one. This next DIY might be my favorite. I found these pieces of coaster that are actually adhesive on the back at Dollar Tree, which I had never seen before. So I definitely snagged some extra ones because these will be great if you ever make coasters to put the cork on the bottom, but I thought I would keep it as a classic cork board and add my own little twist by making it checkerboard and then creating some of my own pins with polymer clay. Here's how I did it. I started off with my cork from Dollar Tree. I got 2 sheets, but I ended up only making 1 because the design I did was a bit time consuming. I thought it would be cute to round off the edges, so I folded a piece of paper to the length that the cork is, and then I rounded off the edges by sketching it out, and I just cut it out to make a little template that I'm going to use on both the top and the bottom. I flipped my cork over because the back side we won't be seeing, and this is a piece of kind of tape on the back anyway, and I traced the top and the bottom. Again, you don't have to do this. I just thought it would be fun to have this shape, or you could do this and just stop there. I think it makes it look really modern to have those nice rounded edges. Next, I grabbed some blue tape and this paper cutter, which is going to help me cut the tape nice and evenly. Just choose what size you want and then just do it consistently each time. This is a super easy and effective way to make sure all of your tape is identical, and I actually did use this technique once before in another video for using a checkerboard pattern, so it definitely works, tried and true, and you're just gonna make maybe 7, 8 of these. You could always make more, and then you're going to line it up along the center of your cork board. I like to take little pieces off the edge and then use them as spacers because you want all of the spaces to be totally equal, so this is the same space as the length of the blue tape, if that makes sense. So I'm using them as spacers, and then I'm going to find the middle the other way and do the same thing, making sure you're using spaces. So everything is going to be totally square and even on all sides. Then I just cut off the excess along the edges with some scissors, and I grabbed my X-Acto knife, and then you're going to look diagonally from the open squares and you're going to get these ones in the middle. I'm just cutting it along it with my X-Acto knife and peeling it off. Be very careful. You don't want to press too hard because you could potentially cut through the cork, although that would be kind of hard to do. You would have to be pressing really, really hard. But if you ever mess up, you can use one of the pieces that you pulled off to fix it. Then we're going to seal it with some clear acrylic paint. I did probably about 4 or 5 coats of this. It's better to do more than to do less. I used my blow dryer in between coats, and again, just made sure it was all in the crevices because cork has lumps and bumps, so we want to make sure it's all in there. And then once it dried, I grabbed some paint. All of this is from Home Depot. It's their sample section, so they're like 50 cents. And I decided to do a rainbow pattern, so I chose my diagonal stripes. I did pink and purple on the top and bottom edges, and then I did some yellow, and you can tell I'm kind of doing it every other, and I repeated that pattern with my blue and then blue to purple, and then I ended up doing my blue, or I guess you could say teal to beige every other through the middle. I kind of was planning it as I was going. What also could be cool is if you just actually mix the paint as you were going. I think that would be really cool to have like an actual gradient, so each of the squares has like a little bit of each color, but you can do whatever you want, and you could also do just one color. That works too. Once it's dry, you can remove the blue tape, which is so satisfying. This is like the best part of checkerboard. It makes me want to do more and more checkerboard, but it turned out super cute. And then I just grabbed a piece of spare cardboard because, as you can tell, it's a little bit not straight, and it's also very thin, so this is going to allow me to actually use it and be functional and put push pins through it so they don't go into the wall. I just cut it a little bit smaller, and then you could probably even do 2 of these. I did really long push pins, but you might actually want to do thumbtacks for this next step. But I grabbed some polymer clay. This step is totally optional. This is just push pins to kind of add a little accent. I grabbed my clay and then I cut it into equal portions and made little circles. I'm doing 4 of them per flower, and I'm pretty much making polymer clay flowers to put on my push pins. I smushed it down to get this kind of corn shape. Doesn't it look like a kernel of corn? And they're going to be a little bit thinner on the inside, and then I'm using this tool that's actually like a Cricut weeding tool to create some lines just to add some added texture, and then I'm overlapping them and pushing them down so they don't break apart. I took some yellow clay, rolled it up, and then flattened it out and put that in the center. I used that same tool that is technically my Cricut weeding tool. You can use whatever tools you have. You can use a pen, a needle, anything you've got going on, and I tapped those centers, and then I baked it at 275 for 30 minutes. I use these pins, but if I were to do it again, I would have used thumbnails or thumbtacks because these made them kind of tall, but the result is so adorable. You could do whatever you want for the pins, and you could also do whatever design and colors you want for the cork, but I think the result is so cute, and it feels like a total 180 from the original cork board that we started with. You could do so many things with this concept. I love that you can paint cork. I totally forgot that was a possibility. I think these would be so cute in a dorm or an office space. You can make a bunch of them if you want, kind of collage them. I think the options are endless with this one. This next DIY is definitely for my cottagecore girlies. I found these adorable little frogs at Dollar Tree a while ago actually, and I had no idea what to do with them. And then finally I decided to make a moss wreath. Moss mirrors had been trending for a while, but I thought this would be super adorable, especially with spring coming up. You can really do whatever you want with them. You could add polymer clay mushrooms, you could do multiple frogs, any type of butterfly. This one turned out so cute, and here's how I did it. I started off with these bath toys. They're cute little frogs. I saw them a while ago, and I know they're still there at my local Dollar Tree, but I thought they were so cute and I just didn't have the right project for them until now. I decided to try to make them a little bit more realistic by painting them kind of this nice muted green, and I added some yellow around the eyes. I made the whole eye black. I think this made the biggest difference, and all of this paint that I'm using is acrylic paint. I painted the entire eye black and added some little white highlights for my eyes. You can see it's already looking eons better and way more realistic. I decided to kind of keep the open mouth vibe because I felt like the anatomy of it made sense for that. I added some shadows, some nostrils, and those little red spots on some certain types of frogs' feet. And I think it turned out really well. It definitely is better than before. And then I used some Liquitex, pretty much clear acrylic paint, but it's glossy, so it's going to give it a shiny effect. Some of the paint that I was using was actually matte. I then grabbed a foam circle, which is also from Dollar Tree, and this moss, which is technically from Joann's. However, Dollar Tree does sell moss. That's the moss from Dollar Tree. It is pretty similar. It's a little bit darker and it doesn't have those fun tones, but you can definitely use it. I just try to use whatever I have. It didn't make sense to buy more moss when I already had some, but Dollar Tree definitely does sell moss. I just kind of arranged it in how I thought it might look good, and then started hot gluing it. Be very, very careful. I burned myself each section that I did, so be more careful than me. I just tried to wrap it around, and as I was doing the hot glue, I was trying to make sure I was doing it really loosely so it would get on those edges, but I just did it section by section, gluing down this main moss, which again is pretty much the same moss as Dollar Tree but slightly darker. And then I flipped it over to the back side and made sure all the pieces kind of wrapped all the way around. Because I had these fun little bits, I also decided to add them. Why not? These bright green parts, I tried to make them nice and evenly spread throughout, and then there are also some purple parts as well. Another thought of something you could do is, if you want to just stick to the Dollar Tree moss, is you could paint some of it, paint some purple parts or some lighter parts. I then glued my little frog on, and I printed out some monarch butterflies. These are actually from my Christmas tree 2 years ago. I printed them out and I just glued like a front and a back together, and they turned out really well. You don't have to do the back side, but I thought I would be, thorough. And I glued a few of those on there, and this is the finished result. It's super cute and very cottagecore. That is it for all of my DIYs. I am definitely a huge budgeter, so I hope this was budget friendly for you. I hope you found it informative, and if you enjoyed it, make sure you like this video, follow me on Instagram, TikTok, all of those things. Thank you so much for watching, and happy making.